I'm Laura Young. I'm the Youth Poet Laureate of the Southern United States, and today I'm going to give you a YouTube video that is the top 10 most common mistakes people make when writing poetry for the first time. So, mistake 1, not paying enough attention to form or structure. When you're writing a poem, you really need to focus on what the shape of the poem is going to be, what it looks like in your mind, how you want to structure it. If you want it to be a form poem, that's like a poem that takes a shape, or if you want it to be a free verse poem, or if you want it to be a limerick or a couplet. It's very important before you start writing a poem to figure out what form the poem is going to take. Number 2, the second most common mistake that people make when writing a poem for the first time is overusing cliches. Is she like a rose? Is she really? Because my favorite song, well, one of my favorite songs is by Outkast, and the quote that I love very much is, lean a little bit closer and you'll notice that roses really smell like poo 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 poo. So when you're picking a metaphor, when you're deciding what you want to compare something to, or using a simile or either or, you have to think very thoroughly about your metaphor and try to use one that's not a cliche. So instead of comparing her to a rose, compare her to a Ford F-150. She is big and strong. She has terrible gas mileage. She has really bright headlights. Megan Thee Stallion, perhaps? So that's really important. You need to be very careful to not use very overused cliches when you're writing your first poem. Number 3 is being too vague. The great thing about poetry is that you can be as in-depth as one can be in such a short amount of time. So poetry is feeling and translation. And if you're too vague, then you're not gonna get the effect you want from your reader. You want them to really feel themselves in the poem. And if you don't use intricate enough or in-depth enough language, they're going to be confused. And I think it's really important that you make sure you're using attention to detail and you're really focusing on each image and each visualization and making sure that you are being specific and you're not just twiddling about. Like, being detailed is really important. Number 4 is not revising. Revise, 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 revise. Oh my god, I used to hate revising my poems because I thought I was perfect. I was like, I'm 12, I'm so cool, I know how to write a poem. But no, they were bad, just like they're always bad. Writing bad poetry is not a problem. There's no such thing as bad poetry. There's only such a thing as under-revised poetry. So if you want to be a good poet, you need to master the skill of revising. Read your poem over and over again. Look at every line. Try and decide, is this the best way I can say this? Is this the most concise way I can say this? Or you could give it to somebody else, like a friend or a buddy who likes poetry, and they can give you feedback, and then you can revise based on that feedback. That's always a really good option to have. Having a peer buddy is a great practice when you are first becoming a writer. Number 5, being too focused on rhyming or not rhyming. So either one can be a problem. There's nothing wrong with wanting to rhyme. I am a big practitioner of rhyme. I think rhyme is one of the most valuable tools you can have when you're writing a poem, but you don't have to rhyme and you don't have to not rhyme either. I find in the modern day, a lot of people who write poetry are afraid to rhyme because it's considered juvenile in our modern poetic world. It's more cool or mature to not rhyme. I think that's stupid. I think that rhyming is just another tool in your arsenal, and when you need to rhyme, you can rhyme, and if you don't feel like rhyming, you don't have to rhyme. So don't worry so much about, oh, am I not rhyming enough, or oh, am I rhyming too much? It's gonna be okay. Just follow your intuition and it will give you the right number of rhymes and not rhymes. Number 6, a lack of imagery. So when you're writing a poem, you want your reader, when they're reading the poem you wrote, to be able to really see and envision what you have written on the page. So it's really important that you take into account the amount of imagery you use in your poem. It's essential, and beginners often forget to incorporate enough imagery. You also need really good sensory details and sort of sonic qualities in order to make a poem really pop off the page. There's a quote that says, "A poem is finished when the final line takes off the top of your head." So if you've written a poem and the final line doesn't feel like it's taking off the top of your head, revise. Fact number 5, revise it. Number 7 is writing for others. Poetry is a extremely personal and very sensitive form of writing. And in order to be a poet who succeeds at writing poetry, you have to write for you. You can't write for other people and succeed in the way that you see other poets succeed, because it is so deeply personal. In fiction writing, you can get away with being depersonalized a little bit because you are creating a character and you're in a different world and you're doing all of these other things that are sort of outside of the realm of personal emotional thought. But poetry is intensely personal. So in order to succeed as a poet, you have to be willing to put yourself into poetry. And I know it's really scary. It was really scary for me a lot of the time, putting my feelings into poetry. But I found that if you find a good community, like other people, like maybe on Discord or in your school or wherever, that also have a love for creative writing and poetry, you can find a space where you feel comfortable sharing those feelings. And that's one of the most important steps to becoming a poet. Number 8, ignoring the power of line breaks. So when you're in jamming poetry, you are doing the work of semicolons, you're doing the work of parentheses, you're doing the work of quotation marks, and it's the most vital tool of punctuation in poetry. So if you're not utilizing your line breaks to their fullest capacity, then you are not fully utilizing your poem's full potential. So when you make a line break, think about it. So try out different forms. Maybe you try only 2 words per line, or maybe you're doing a lot of words, or maybe you're doing just a couple of words. It's really important and it's up to you. And so really think about your line breaks and your enjambment whenever you are writing a poem. And then number 9, one of the biggest mistakes that up-and-comers make, fresh, brand new poets make when they're writing poetry, is being too afraid to submit to literary journals. I don't care that you've been writing poetry for 3 days, for 2 days, for 1 day. Take your work and send it out into the world. Because if you don't start sending your work out into the world, you're gonna be too afraid when you're really good and your poems need to be shared. I promise you, there is someone out there who will love your poetry. There's someone out there who understands what you've been through. And the thing about poetry is it is the tool that connects those people to each other. And so don't be afraid to submit to your school's literary journal. Don't be afraid to make a submittable account. Make an account. Right now, go do it, and it'll show you this huge list of all the places that are accepting poetry, and a lot of them are smaller journals. And you might think, oh, I'm not a good enough poet to get accepted to a journal. You are. There's so many different kinds of journals that are looking for so many different kinds of things, and I guarantee there is a journal out there that wants what you have. So just look for it, and I promise you'll find it. And then number 10, the number 1 biggest mistake that people make when they're starting out becoming a poet on their first journey of poetry is not reading enough poetry. I know it feels weird to go into the bookstore and buy a book of poems because like everybody buys fiction books. Everybody's reading like sci-fi and whatever. You can write sci-fi poems. I'm gonna talk about that in another video. You need to read other poems. It is such a vital tool for producing your own work. You need to look at other writers, other masters of poetic form, and you need to take what they've taught you and apply it to your own work. It is so important to read other writers. I have some recommendations: Morgan Parker, Maya Angelou, June Jordan. Those are just some amazing Black female poets who I love, and any of those could be a good starting place for reading poetry. But there's always the traditional ones like Oscar Wilde or Walt Whitman. Any of these are good options for starting out reading poetry, but you have to read poetry. I hope this has been helpful to you, and I hope you liked this video. So if you did, maybe subscribe, maybe leave a like, maybe leave a comment, just a cheeky little comment. And thank you so much for watching my YouTube video, and I hope you have a great day. I'm your friendly neighborhood youth poet laureate, and I'll see you next week.